You can count when you're happy. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can count when you're sad. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or count when you're frightened. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Count when you're mad. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Counting is wonderful. Counting is marvelous. Counting's terrific. And how?
Last time on Smallville, there was a giant mega tornado, Lana was an idiot and let herself get sucked up into it, Jonathan ran off to punch a reporter and left his wife with a hovering spaceship in the middle of a huge storm, and Clark ran off after Lana in the middle of the spring formal after promising Chloe that he wouldn't. Caught up? Great! Now let's find out what happens. Clark's ship flies up into the tornado after Clark. I guess it's programmed to do that whenever it's randomly turned on by somebody else, but who knows how exactly it knows where to find him. Clark rips open Lana's truck door and saves her, leaving her baffled the rest of the episode as to how she survived with only a mild concussion. Remembering Clark being there, but uncertain if what she saw was real or a dream, and Clark naturally denying everything extremely unconvincingly. Although he hesitated, Lex saves Lionel from the beam that's about to fall on him, and in the hospital, Lionel reveals that he noticed Lex hesitates and calls him on it, leading Lex to feel ashamed for being weak and making snap judgments the rest of the episode, including putting his father through a risky surgery and shooting Roger Nixon just before he can kill Jonathan Kent. Jonathan and Roger Nixon squabble about Clark's abilities and whether or not the Kents deserve to keep him as their son, or if he, as Roger puts it, belongs to the world. Jonathan tries to keep his temper in check, wanting to kill Nixon several times, but settling with just punching him in the face over and over again. They're trapped in an old crypt where Roger can get cell phone reception, but Jonathan breaks his phone when he hears Roger talking to Lex. Maybe the police would have been a safer call right then. Meanwhile, Lex tries to help Clark find his dad until Clark hears Lex answering Nixon's call and begins to mistrust Lex's motives for helping him. Chloe spends most of the episode wallowing in self-pity over her dance not going exactly as she planned, and assumes that just because Clark went to help Lana, who was on the side of town closest to the tornadoes and nobody else knew that at the time, now has no shot with him whatsoever, and she seems to also assume that he only did that for Lana and that he wouldn't have done it for her. So naturally, rather than having a conversation with him about this, she just breaks it off with him and feeds him the "let's just be friends" line. So Lana is now perplexed about Clark, and regardless of the many miraculous times he saved her when she was conveniently unconscious, she now decides there's something unusual about him. I guess she was just saving her skepticism for a new season arc. Lex kills Nixon to save Jonathan, which gives him a fresh start with Jonathan, but also puts him one step closer on the path to darkness, as does finding out Lionel was blinded in the storm and hearing him say that he should have just let him die. We see that the ship is lost in a cornfield for somebody to find, possibly to start this whole exposing Clark plot that should have died with Nixon all over again. Then credits. First off, let me say this one's got some fantastic production values. Roger Nixon's car stuck in the tree looks awesome, and Greg Beeman, who directed this episode, clearly thought so too. He keeps showing it to us from lots of different angles. I surprisingly liked this episode a lot more than I remembered it. Cliffhangers are really hard to pull off. Very often, you'll have a fantastic setup, but the conclusion won't deliver. As much praise as Star Trek The Next Generation gets for the killer cliffhanger that was the best of both worlds, it's Riker saying fire with Picard as a board on the other ship that everybody remembers, not the way that situation was resolved. It's really tough to make a satisfying resolution to a cliffhanger when your viewers are all speculating for 3 months. By the time the next season starts, that swelled up anticipation makes fans expect something more spectacular than the setup, and that almost never happens. So what I appreciate about this one is that everything doesn't just go right back to status quo by the end, even though the boldest conclusions weren't necessarily taken. Lana doesn't see enough of what Clark does to save her to force him to admit to having superpowers, and there's still some amount of convenient unconsciousness, but at least it wasn't done the safest way, the way it always happens with Kryptofreaks. Now she's really seen him do something miraculous, and even though he denies it, she won't let it drop. Now keep in mind, I'm looking at this, of course, one episode at a time. In retrospect, this goes on for seasons longer than it should have. A circular argument about secrets that never goes anywhere until the show's producers arbitrarily finally decide it's time for Lana to know the secret. This infuriating dance is what I like to call the Clark-Lana emotional causality loop. But we'll get to all that later. Here, just setting it up, it's actually quite good. For the first time, somebody looks at something unexplainable related to Clark, and instead of conveniently ignoring it so the show can retain its status quo, somebody says, "That makes no sense." That's kind of jarring that it comes from Lana, but it finally gives her something to do and helps propel the show into a potentially interesting direction, especially because it puts Lana on the same path Lex has been on since the pilot, trying to discover Clark's secret. Ironic that both of them were saved by Clark in vehicular emergencies. And the other major subplot in the cliffhanger, Lex hesitating to save his father, is also ended kind of in the safe way. He does pull Lionel out of the way of the debris and saves his life. But again, the show doesn't just shortchange us by doing the easy thing and then going right back to the way everything was before. As much as letting Lionel die would have been a huge turning point for the character, and one could argue it might have been really interesting right here, though perhaps too early on Lex's path to the dark side, this event is still a major defining moment as Lex importantly seems to regret his decision to save his father. When he tells Clark that he hesitated, he's clearly worried about what that says about his character, that he almost let his own father die. But he's also torn, because he's afraid it'll make him look weak in the eyes of his father. Vortex follows this internal struggle Lex was battling in Tempest very consistently. It's hard to tell what bothers him more, that he almost let his dad die, or that he didn't take swift action. And now, due to his hesitation, his father is blinded and tells Lex it would have been better to let him die. Lex's life really would have been much easier had he let Lionel die, but the question that tears him up inside is whether he could ever be the honest and noble person he'd like to be in either direction. Had he let Lionel die, he wouldn't have that influence in his life anymore. But to be free of that, he would have committed a terrible crime. He'd still be like his father because he would have done precisely what his father might do in a similar circumstance. On the other hand, now he's still alive and worse, weakened. As the old adage says, don't wound what you can't kill. So now, not only does Lex have to deal with his father's influence and control, but his father sees him as even weaker than he did before for not letting him die. So all throughout the episode, Lex makes snap judgments now, having decided that he was wrong to hesitate. You can be the judge as to whether he wishes more that he had rushed to save his father or rushed to the choice to let him die. So he immediately sends his father to surgery, even though one doctor says that's a bad idea. And at the end of the episode, he doesn't hesitate to shoot Roger Nixon. Yes, he's saved Jonathan's life, but you can tell from the look on his face that it's about a lot more than that. This is the person he is, the life he's chosen. He didn't know if he was capable of killing when he thought it was necessary because he let Lionel live. But now he's proven it to himself. He's capable of making that choice. He can be a killer. And what's worse, he can do terrible things, like his father, to clean up his own messes. Keep in mind that he's not really a hero for saving Jonathan, as Roger Nixon was Lex's fault in the first place. So while he didn't do the bold thing maybe some of us were really intrigued to see him do, saving his father leads to an important turning point in his road down that dark path. Thematically, this episode is all about how people see the world differently in the aftermath of a crisis. I think this point is well taken, and the episode does a great job of showing a variety of characters dealing with different personal issues. People learn the most important things about themselves when put in stressful situations and forced to make those hard choices. We've already discussed Lex and Lana and how they decide to use what they learn from their experiences. I think Clark is an interesting one too, because he's the only person whose life wasn't put in danger in the storm itself. There's some kryptonite in this episode, but besides that, what he learns is about the effect he has on others rather than how he handles catastrophe. But it's still about his personal character like it is with Lex. He berates Lex for not telling him about Roger Nixon when he finds out they know each other. Lex's tendency to tell half-truths and then to justify that by saying he does it to protect his friends damages their friendship. But then, the episode closes with Lana getting angry with Clark for not telling her the whole truth about his powers, and his reasons are, of course, exactly the same as what Lex claims his are. Clark believes in the truth, and yet, to protect his friends, he has to lie just as much as Lex does. He's beginning to see some hypocrisy in his own logic, and now he's dealing with his own internal struggle. How can he uphold those values he was brought up with when his parents, who taught him those values, also say that he's the exception to some of them? That you can't tell the truth all the time, even when it hurts people, because the truth might hurt them even more. And so appropriately, Jonathan faces his own demons in this crisis too. He hates Roger Nixon for trying to exploit Clark for his own gain, and he has to reel himself in because he'd like to kill him to keep him away from Clark. But not only does Jonathan have to deal with his own temper, but he has to deal with his own selfish desires. Even though he knows Nixon's priorities are skewed and all he cares about is himself, he still thinks about what Nixon has to say, that Jonathan is selfish, that he is keeping the world's greatest secret for himself just because he and his wife couldn't have children. Ultimately, he decides he was justified in doing this because he sees Clark as a human being, and because of a story he tells about how he almost took him to a scientist, but he knew that Clark would be treated like a lab experiment and wouldn't have a normal life. Now, Nixon does have a point, though. Clark is the answer to questions that have inspired the imaginations of people for hundreds of years. But the question is humanity's overall curiosity more important than the freedom of one man to live his own life? Kind of interesting how that goes into Lex's philosophies also. I love these scenes with Jonathan and Nixon. At one point, Nixon seems to finally get where Jonathan is coming from when Jonathan tells that story, and I'm glad we see that spark of humanity in him. That's really all we need to know he's a real feeling human being, but somewhere along the way he's gotten really corrupted, and a few hours with Jonathan aren't enough to really change him. So by the end, he tries to kill Jonathan for his story once they've gotten out of the crypt. Now, my only question about Nixon, though, is that since Jonathan's already destroyed his film of Clark using his powers, how does killing Jonathan accomplish anything for him? Why would you ever risk a murder unless you absolutely had to? This guy obviously hasn't gone insane. His goals are still the same. Make his name on what he knows about Clark. This seems like Smallville falling back on its tired somebody's gotta be homicidal crotch. And we need it so Lex has somebody to kill. Again, I love that this ends with Lex holding a smoking gun, but I'm really fuzzy on Nixon's motivations. I always struggle with whether or not I should expect high school kids in fiction to have the same sense as I would adults. I don't love Chloe in this episode, but I don't know if that's a problem. I mean, getting all broken up about a dance not going her way and the guy leaving for another girl, even if it was to save that other girl from a tornado, seems like something girls I knew in high school might actually do. Maybe the issue I have with it is that Chloe is usually written as the girl who's mature for her age and is better than stupid adolescent behavior, except when it comes to romance. As soon as she falls for a guy, she degenerates into typical WBCW melodrama chick. I do appreciate that she at least comes out and admits how selfish she's being right in the middle of a crisis situation, though. But almost more irritating to me than that is that she's so bent out of shape over Clark going to rescue Lana from a tornado, and let me reiterate that he did save her, and that if he wasn't there she might have died, but Chloe's just worked up over the universe seeming to be against them being together, so she doesn't even think about that. It doesn't even occur to Chloe how impossible what Clark did is. Why does Lana make more sense than Chloe this episode? Clark's truck exploded. Chloe drove. Chloe presumably drove her own car away from the dance. So why isn't she asking obvious questions like, oh, I don't know, how did Clark get there so fast? On foot? She and Lana ought to be teaming up to get to the bottom of this. This is the girl with the wall of weird. Nothing gets past her. She catches on to bizarre happenings all the time, but this one goes totally over her head. I think love triangles just suck the brains out of people in this universe. Like, if you took a CAT scan of Chloe's brain before she started competing with Lana to get Clark, and then you looked at one from after that, you'd probably find she has like half the stimulation in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for social behavior, as she used to. And questions to ask Jarrell when I get to heaven. Who designed Clark's ship? It has a key that starts it up that goes on the outside instead of the inside, like the keys to any other vehicle you'd ever seen ever. I mean, okay, I guess a baby is inside and nobody's driving it, but as it turns out, that is the stupidest design ever, because when the key gets struck by lightning, it flies right out and the whole thing shuts down. Now, we know from later episodes the alloy is virtually indestructible, but the piece that makes the whole thing work can fly right off if you electrocute it. And that seems pretty convenient, right? That the one part of the ship that gets struck by lightning is the key. Alright, let's go to the scoreboard. We've got one instance of convenient unconsciousness. That's Lana right after Clark rescues her from the tornado, though she is awake through a lot of that and actually does get to see Clark flying around in the tornado. There's a rude super speed exit. That's when Clark brings Lana to the hospital. There's one car crash. We don't actually see it crash, but that car in the tree obviously crashed, so I'm counting it. We've got one instance of Clark being affected by green kryptonite. We've got one instance of Clark flying. He says he felt that he was willing himself toward the truck, making us think that he actually did for a brief moment fly. We have one instance of Clark and Lana in the loft right there at the end, and we have one instance of somebody walking away from someone else angry, and that's, again, Lana in the loft at the end. I'm going to give Vortex a 3.5 out of 4. A surprisingly satisfying conclusion to the cliffhanger and a great start to the season. It's not as good as the first part, but cliffhangers rarely end better than they start. Was there anything I missed in any category? Leave me a personal message on Geekvolution, and I'll be sure to add it to the count. I'm Captain Logan, and consider this episode counted.